My name is Martin Newman and I'm the Consumer Champion. After 37 years in consumer-facing industries, believe me, I have seen it all. My goal is to play a role in providing consumers with a voice, to connect with brands that they've engaged with, and to help companies to learn from their customers where they're going right or where they're going wrong. You're joining me on Customer Centricity, the podcast. Each episode you will find me in conversation with leading business people, discussing some of the key issues around how to empower positive change for consumers and brands. Before I introduce our guest for this episode, let me tell you a little bit more about customer service action. Just like you, I've been on the wrong end of some staggeringly bad customer service. We've all experienced it, haven't we? Whether it's the rude waiter or having to wait 40 minutes in a queue. And just like you again, I've also been delighted by an amazing experience when I wasn't expecting it. But aside from telling the manager or writing a rather awkward thank you note on TripAdvisor, what can you really do when something is great or when it's not so good? My frustration has always been not knowing how to raise these issues with the brand in question in the first place, or whether in fact I'd be even wasting my time by doing so. For these reasons, I launched Customer Service Action, a platform where people can share their good and their bad customer service stories and experiences in one impartial place. My vision is that we can collectively make a difference and create the change that consumers seek, and in turn help businesses too. Good customer service and good customer experience leads to successful brands. So please visit us at www.customerserviceaction.com to learn more. Thank you for listening to Customer Centricity. And now for our guest. Welcome to my Customer Centricity podcast, Ollie Banks.
Hey Martin, thank you so much for having me. It's wonderful to join you here.
Thank you. Well, listen, you had me on your podcast, so I felt it would be rude not to reciprocate. And I love what you do, and you know you've really made a name for yourself in the world of retail transformation, and I'm excited to kind of dig into that in a bit more detail and understand more about your background and how you kind of arrived at where you are now and what you do today and how you support businesses and just the general kind of challenges that you see retailers facing into. So that's probably quite a good starting point. Why don't you tell us a bit about your background and kind of how your career's progressed and kind of where you've landed at and what you do today?
Yeah, sure. So I've got, I suppose, not a very conventional career. So I'll start with now and we'll work backwards. So I'm a retail transformation specialist. I work with retailers to define their ideal or target operating model, and then the changes and transformations that are needed to actually bring that operating model, that ideal, to life. So yeah, working with a number of different retailers on all sorts of elements and really looking to pull out how should the business work going forward. I also host a podcast called The Retail Transformation Show, which we have got a fantastic episode with you, Martin. Thank you for that. And live virtual events as well. So Retail Transformation Live launched during the pandemic. And again, you were one of the keynote speakers last year. So thank you once again. And
sure. Thanks for
having me. I suppose, if we, again, start to rewind, I was at Tesco for 5 years, working through a number of different areas there, ultimately ending up in their internal consulting function. So that exposed me to a huge amount of the business. And then prior to that, I was actually not in retail. So I was in engineering, designing photocopiers, believe it or not.
Right, designing, actually, from a product development point of view.
Actually, from a product development point of view, so looking at all the mechanics, and if you think about a photocopy, it's how the paper is moving through the machine and how the image gets onto the paper. So really quite technical stuff. Photocopiers are quite incredibly complex in as much as they've got more parts than a car. So there is a lot going on, which was actually a great prep for then working in a retail industry where, once again, there is a huge amount going on at any given moment in time. And then, working a bit further back, I sort of started off, I suppose, with a bit of an entrepreneurial theme. So I used to run a mobile cocktail bar business and dabbled very early on in e-commerce with cocktail glassware barware, and so on. So yeah, that's kind of a bit of a
Very good. So it sounds like you're. It
rapid
sounds like
tour
you're.
through.
Sounds like you're a handyman to have around, and I believe you're quite handy from a DIY perspective. And you can
Yes.
also make a good cocktail. So what's not to like about that?
There we go. Yeah, busy during the day, and something nice to drink in the evening.
Exactly. There you go. That sounds pretty entertaining. Tell me, so you kind of touched on it, but maybe if you just want to dive into it a little bit in terms of, some of those sort of earlier experiences in your career and competencies that you developed, and how you've been able to essentially leverage those and transfer them into what you do today as a consultant, working with businesses, helping them to transform.
Yeah, so if I take the engineering side of my career
Yeah.
first, what was quite interesting, and I didn't really realise this at the time, it's only on reflection, was actually it's about problem solving. It's about understanding a situation, understanding what's going on, what you're trying to achieve at the same time, and then looking at what are the different solutions and options available. So yeah, very solution focused rather than looking to dwell on what's gone wrong, so to speak. But obviously,
Yeah.
you need to understand any given problem to really find that perfect solution. And that gave me a great grounding. So I did all my project management training there. I did Lean Six Sigma, so green belt, black belt, in that sort of manufacturing environment as well. So that has actually been, like I say, a great entree into what I do now, which is very, very similar stuff, to be honest. It's just a different topic.
Right.
And then I think the cocktail side gave me, again, a great grounding into retail. Again, didn't realise it at the time, and it wasn't intentional. But thinking about how do you actually serve customers, how do you create a good vibe at a cocktail party, for example, and then getting into some of the details of e-commerce as well, in terms of everything from how do you look at a customer flow on a very early basic website compared to nowadays.
Yeah.
So yeah,
Yeah.
it's really, really good grounding.
What's interesting, clearly a lot of very transferable skills, or at least you've developed your career in a way that you've been able to leverage a lot of that expertise, which makes a lot of sense. What do you see, given the work that you're doing at the moment with, and have done for a number of years now with some fairly well-known brands? What are the main barriers and issues do you think that stop retailers from successfully transforming their businesses to be what I would call, or how I define, sort of consumer or customer centric, which I think, is my passion and my kind of core area? What are the things that are
Yes,
stopping retailers from achieving that?
that's a great question. I think there are probably three elements. So the first one is around clarity, and actually, what are we trying to do? So omnichannel is a good example of this, right? Everyone says we're going to do omnichannel,
Yeah.
but actually, what does that tangibly mean? What is the clarity behind that? And quite often, it's just not there. I remember, well, sitting on that word omnichannel, when I first heard it, I said, what is omnichannel? And no one really knew. Yet
Yeah.
we were
As I often say, if you ask 100 people in 100 businesses what omnichannel means, you'll get 10,000 different answers.
yeah, yep, absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely. So I think that clarity is the first piece. I think
Yeah.
the next two are kind of linked. So delivery and overwhelm are two other challenges. So the overwhelm piece, there is just so much going on. Often retailers, of course, have got a ton of different activities, trading activities, tactical activities, change. Obviously, lots of people to work into, lots of different moving parts, and it
Yeah.
can become very difficult to do all of that and think about change as well. Often, the owners of change are actually the same people that are responsible for the day-to-day running of a particular part of a retail operation, rather than having a separate sort of change function. Only the very biggest organizations, in my experience, have that luxury of like an internal
Yeah.
consultancy, like, for example, Tesco had. And I think that can lead to overwhelm, where you've got to keep the business rolling, you've got to keep the wheels on the bus, so to speak. But then how do you actually upgrade the bus at the same time? That can be difficult. And that then evolves into that delivery challenge of, it's hard to do transformation. It's hard to really change things. There are many different aspects, many different elements to consider as you're thinking about it. Couple that with that overwhelm, and it's a big challenge. So I'd say those are the three elements that are the biggest challenge with regard to making that transformation into a customer-centric business.
Good observations. I think, one thing just to layer over that, I suppose, is, it is hard to change, but it's also, I think, about changing mindsets, because, I regularly talk to boards of directors, and very often when I ask them the question, what's keeping them up at night, I get a response of, well, the cost to serve customers, it's hitting margin and it's not sustainable. And I always feel when I hear that the business is going to be focused arguably on the wrong things, because if you're focused on how much it costs to serve someone, you're probably going to make the wrong decisions. You're probably going to take away resources. You're maybe not going to invest in the right technology. You're maybe not going to empower your people to deliver the right level of experience or service. And ultimately, it's going to be to the detriment of the customer and their experiences. Do you agree with that? Is that something do you see that, or do you feel that that's valid?
Absolutely. It's what are you focused on, right? We talk about being customer centric, and all businesses say, yes, I'm customer centric. But often, are you? Are you actually customer centric, or are you actually maybe more financially centric? And the customer is a nice way of achieving the finances. Now, I'm not saying which is right and which is wrong. That's actually, I would suggest, relevant for every individual business. But I think saying you're customer centric and not truly being customer centric, or saying it when you're actually thinking more about the finances, I think that's it can be misleading. And then from a culture perspective, let's be honest, people recognize that, right? If you are saying one thing and doing another, then
Exactly. I think that's a really nice way of thinking of it, actually, at a very holistic level. Are you really customer centric, or are you financially centric? And, my argument is that basically, if you're focused only on the numbers, as I say, then you focus on cost, then you make the wrong decisions. Whereas, because you're really thinking about the here and now in the short term. Whereas if you're playing the long game and you're actually trying to build customer lifetime value, and you recognize that there's a much greater incentive to encourage Ollie and Martin to keep coming back over the next 3 years, and their value to our organization is going to be exponentially greater than it is by just focusing on how much it costs us to bring them in the first place, what we call the return on advertising spend or whatever, then I think you build a more sustainable business. And it's interesting. I think one of the challenges is that it's always been hard to your point there, it's actually been quite hard to define what is customer centricity. What does it actually entail end to end? Because it kind of sounds obvious, but actually, it's not an easy. It isn't an easy thing to deliver. And part of it is the bits that the customer sees, but then a large part of it is the bit that you would get involved in helping. Which is actually, how do you transform your business? How do you create a more integrated organizational structure? How do you make sure you've got data and insight that informs you to make the right decisions around customers, or whatever it actually happens to be.
Absolutely. I think it's important as you're thinking about the culture and how do you actually be customer centric. What are the behaviours that you'd expect to also, you'd expect to see? What would you want someone doing in a meeting with regard to customer centric thinking, for example? What would you want someone doing in terms of a particular action or a particular strategy when it comes to customer centric? And I certainly remember being at Tesco quite early on, thinking about a particular project, and it was a productivity project. And I remember getting called out in a meeting and someone saying, "I don't think that's very customer focused." And I was like, "Yeah, it's not." And it kind of blew me away, to be honest. And if that culture isn't there to challenge ideas that aren't customer focused, customer centric, How are you going to build that? So I mean, that was a really
Exactly.
interesting learning for me.
Yeah. Well, there's a couple of anecdotes I could probably just bring into that very briefly. So, a good friend of mine, Mike Logue, who until very recently ran Dreams, the world's most profitable bed and bedding retailer. He did a great job of turning that business around over a 7-8 year period, and it's recently been sold for, over £500 million. But long story short, he recognised that, having proper insight was really the way to go. And he spent his first 6 weeks not in the head office, as they called it, or he changed the name of it to bedquarters from headquarters, to prove to people in the field, in the stores, that there was no disconnect and that they were all in this together and all sort of going in the same direction. But he created a thing called Pillow Talk, and they capture on a daily basis, I think from about 40% of all their customers conduct or fill out a survey. So they get a lot of very tangible insight about what works, what doesn't work, both online and offline. And to the point where they start all of their business meetings now with customer insight. So taking away, the subjectivity from the conversation. And I think that's, one way that, you can certainly achieve that and have that sort of level of focus.
Yes.
I think, I've been both on, like you, I've been on the client side, I've been a retailer, and then I've also been a consultant, done a few other things. But, when you're doing the kind of work that you're doing, it's obviously hugely important, particularly when you're involved in big change and transformation projects, that you take people on the journey, because I'd imagine that sometimes some of the stuff that you're working on has been kind of pushed down through the organisation. And it might be the case, I could be wrong, but it might be the case sometimes where the people who are going to have to change how they work might not have been consulted, might not have been involved in sort of deciding, what that new way of working looks like. How do you go about making sure when you're working with businesses that people come with you on the journey, the stakeholders, whoever it is, feels engaged and sort of buys into what you're trying to deliver?
So I think there's so many different aspects of this. We could have a whole conversation about it, I'm sure. I think first and foremost, it's really important to recognise that there are so many genuinely great perspectives that exist within the sort of the ecosystem of any given change or even the whole organisation, right? And I'm very much of the view that everyone is there to do the right thing, to do the right thing for the business, for future growth, for customers. And I think if you take firstly that mindset that everyone is there trying to aim towards the same goal, and recognise that actually what's their point of view on this, it's valid, how are they trying to move this forward? I think sometimes we can get into this place where you have stakeholder management, right? You're not managing the stakeholders. The stakeholders are there. It's how do you understand their point of view? How do you then bake that into the solution that you're putting forward? And then, another big piece is, from a change perspective, is that comms as you roll it out, as you explain and, as you say, take people on the journey. How are you doing that? What are you intentionally going to do to build up the knowledge, to help people understand the challenges, the problems, the opportunities, and why this is moving you towards that ultimate ideal place? And I think the other thing to think about is the communication mechanism as well. And I would absolutely encourage people to look to marketing and advertising, and how do we do that every day of the week, every day of the year to customers? And actually, how can we do that same strategy to colleagues? Think about engaging people in an omni-channel way. How can you help get the message out about any particular change to a whole host of different people, different cultures, different mindsets, different starting positions?
Yeah, I think that's a great point. I think for me, in a number of the businesses I've worked for over the years, when I was on the client side, I think it was that internal communication piece that was really missing, and I've been involved in projects where, big consultancies have come in and, you've felt, really quite awkward because you've been asked lots of sort of challenging questions, and you know that there's change going on, but you've not really been told what's happening, why it's happening, what it means for you. I think it's hugely important, from a cultural point of view, to make people feel engaged and that they're part of the answer, not part of the problem. And that can certainly be achieved in the way that you were outlining. I want to change tact a little bit and sort of step away from that sort of retail transformation for a second. And well, I guess actually it's a good segue into another potential form of retail transformation around the high street. I'm kind of keen to get your perspective on the high street. Has it got a future? What do you think?
I think yes, but I'd almost suggest we all look at that question. What do we mean by high street? Because I think what's important to recognise is the high street we have today, the high street we had last year, 10 years ago, 20 years ago, is not going to be the future of the high street, in my honest opinion. We've seen lots of examples of retail changing the way it comes to customers in terms of distribution centres, out of town shopping malls and shopping centres. And actually that is all impacting the high street, depending on how we define that term, high street, of course. And I think we're starting to see different pieces coming into that. And I think what I'm quite excited about is more about community opportunities in those sort of regional sort of hubs, shall we call them, of a classic town. And I think that's a great opportunity for retailers and other, shall we call them, direct to customer, direct to consumer businesses, not just selling stuff, to actually
restaurants or whatever it happens to be.
Yeah. All sorts. I think there's going to be some huge opportunities, and actually, as you start to think about how the working life, our working lives and working patterns, work from home, etc., evolves, I do wonder. I think there could be some really interesting things that we haven't started to see start to build back into that high street. So I think, will there be a physical hub for people to come together in residential areas? Yes, I do. Will it be a series of shops, a mix of chains and independents? Not necessarily as we think of it today.
Yeah, I agree with that, and I think it has to be something different, because clearly that model isn't really fit for purpose, and there's got to be more reasons for consumers to want to visit the high street. I was just thinking as we were talking there that maybe we need to rebrand it, because the high street to some extent has a sort of tired and slightly negative connotation because of all the media hype in the last sort of 5, 6, 7 years. Maybe we just need to start referring to it as the community centre, or the community hub, or whatever it is. And that would maybe help to drive some of the decision making and the thinking, behind it, to have a better mix of entertainment, leisure, food and beverage, physical products you can buy, etc. So it becomes something much more engaging and much more, as you say, community orientated. Maybe that's one way to go. Well, thank you for that.
If you take that point of view and you think, actually, let's look around the world at what different cultures either do today or have done in the past, I think there's going to be a huge inspiration as well. How do we bring people together and forge a community?
Yeah, definitely. I think one of the things, just to finish on that, one thing that is changing, which is quite interesting, is, however many decades ago we used to live, in and around our high streets, and then we all started kind of moving out into suburbia. And what seems to be happening now is there's a lot of residential property development going on in and around our town centres, which is going to bring population back into these areas, which I think to a large extent obviously lends itself really well to creating the type of environment that you and I were, describing there.
Definitely.
Just in terms of your own experience of the retail sector, and whatever you feel you can share, and you don't necessarily need to talk about clients, you can talk about retail in general, but who are the exemplars? Who are the brands that you think we should be keeping an eye on? Who are the ones that are setting the pace?
That's a super question. I mean, there's so many different companies that I think are doing some fantastic things, and I'd label out particular sort of, I suppose, key capabilities that different retailers have got. I think there are companies like Currys that are doing a fantastic job with omnichannel, and actually how do you best build up the customers' understanding of the product and the solutions that they offer through things like video chat and obviously all the in-store services, easy pickup, straight to car, etc. So I think Currys are doing a great job at that. Amazon are of course doing a fantastic job at making it just so easy for customers to buy. I think everyone likes to poo-poo Amazon a bit, if I'm honest. The big nasty retailer that's bullying everyone.
Yeah.
But actually,
Yeah.
why are they being so successful? It's because they are really focused on helping customers and reducing all of the frictions within the shopping journey. I mean, look at what they're doing with Amazon Go, and really championing that whole checkout free piece. Can
I just, if you don't mind, I want to mention something very briefly, because when you were talking earlier about businesses that are focusing on that, I gave the example of Dreams. I mean, Amazon, they have people who have responsibility in the business for raising the bar. So in meetings, they're always thinking about, is this really as far as we can take this? Could we? How might we make this even better for customers? And treating the business almost as if, you'll have heard this, Jeff Bezos talking about, every day is kind of day one. So there's that kind of continual service, product, customer development mindset, and how do we continually obsess over customers and do a better job of serving them. So they never rest on their laurels. They're always, driving it forward,
Yeah, absolutely. The other company I think that's doing some fantastic stuff is Dyson, to be honest, in terms of putting the product there as the solution to a particular customer problem, and I think really championing their product in, I would say, a market leading way. So there's lots of great examples of different brands, different retailers out there that are each doing something incredible, and I think it's really important as you look at a benchmark, an exemplar. Don't look for one, look for lots, I would suggest.
Absolutely. And I think those are examples as well of brands. I think brands that do this well, and really are customer centric, are brands who have, rather than creating a proposition for customers that they're forcing upon them, because this is how they operate, they've really thought about actually what is the experience that customers are really looking for, and therefore let us structure our organization, our operating model, our processes and everything around that so we can deliver that experience. And when the example you gave there of Dyson, I mean, I know from our own experience here of a Dyson product breaking down, which is probably quite unusual. The service side of it was brilliant. There was no kind of, you get with a lot of businesses when you call the contact center, I'm sorry, there's nothing we can do, or I need to go and ask my supervisor, and the supervisor needs to ask their manager, and you wait a week before you get a decision about what they're going to do about your broken product, your broken vacuum cleaner, whatever it is. They just replaced it.
Yeah.
They just replaced
absolutely.
it. There was no questions asked. I mean, and I just think, again, from a customer lifetime value perspective, that do you really need the data to prove that that's a better way to deal with that situation, rather than looking at the cost of doing that, and saying no to the customer? Clearly you're going to lose a customer and they're not going to come back. I think a lot of it actually comes down to common sense, doesn't it? In terms of what these businesses have thought through. You were talking earlier about the virtual event that you created, which I had a privilege of participating in and doing a keynote in one of the first versions you did during lockdown. I thought that was great. What was the inspiration for that? And also, have you thought about the possibility of turning that into something physical as an event?
Yeah, so putting on Retail Transformation Live was quite transformative for me, to be honest. I started it right at the start of lockdown here in the UK. Took 9 days to put together the first one, and it was really there to help build a community, to help bring people together at a time of crisis, I would suggest, and give some direction, give some guidance, give some support and help keep the conversation going. Like I say, really early on, March 2020 it was, and got just incredible feedback about bringing people together, helping make it easy. And I suppose my thought as I put that on was, how can I focus on that community aspect? What are the elements that help a real event feel like a community? And bringing that into the digital sphere was, I suppose, my goal, to help, like I say, keep that conversation going. And really enjoyed it, challenging the way, cutting the way forward, and it's been a true honour to host so many people like yourself, sharing just incredible golden nuggets to the audience, and helping shape the future of retail. I genuinely think that. And then to part B, about moving it into the physical world. Yes, definitely. Watch this space.
I was going to say, watch this space.
Yeah.
Yeah, good. Well, I think you should, because you've done a really good job of building a community, and that you share a lot of insight. Your email newsletter that goes out every week has some really great insight in there. I always pick up one or two things that I might bring into some of the content I'm delivering or whatever. So I think you've obviously found a great way of engaging with your community and building that community, and why not leverage it, and why not do something in the physical space? So we look forward to, I'm sure, hearing more about that when you're ready to share and when you're ready to go live with something. You've obviously done a great job of building your own personal brand and building OB & Co. And, but I get the sense that you're kind of a one-man band. I'm just curious to know, have you thought about scaling what you do? Is there any aspiration to do that? Or are you quite happy kind of just sort of, I wouldn't say plodding is not the right word, because you're definitely not plodding, but are you quite happy to kind of continue on the path that you are? Or do you envisage maybe trying to build something more substantive moving forward?
So I've been self-employed now for 7 years or so, and I've spent actually quite a bit of time really understanding myself. Actually, to be honest, I mentioned not realizing some of the reflection elements until fairly recently, and I spent a lot of time working out the purpose and actually how do I fit in and help retailers. What's the sort of speciality? And so, yeah, absolutely at a point where now I've defined that more clearly, defined the sort of the different frameworks and tools and techniques that I'm putting into place, and yes, building a team of associates and consultants to take on more and bigger challenges. I think there's a huge amount of change and transformation that continues to impact the whole retail market, as well as surrounding markets, hospitality, for example. And I think absolutely my vision is to be there as a partner to help retailers with those challenges that we spoke about earlier, right? In terms of things like clarity and overwhelm and delivery. They're all critical if you are truly wanting to transform and evolve.
Sure. Well, that's another watch this space, I guess, in that context. So we look forward to seeing how things develop for you over the next few years. I'd just like to finish with what I thought was an interesting sort of conclusion to the conversation, which is, if you were going back into retail today, so let's just imagine as an fellow entrepreneur, and you were starting a new business in retail, what would it be? What would you be selling, and what would the model be, out of curiosity?
So this is a really interesting one. I think I'd have to go with one of my personal passions, because that's what brings it to life, and you can begin to understand the customer viewpoint, and you just have fun doing it. So I think that would either be something around trades and renovation, home improvement. I think there's a great opportunity there in terms of actually how do you sell the solution, to the problem, rather than selling a washer. How do you sell not a drippy tap?
Yeah, that's couldn't agree more. Yeah,
and in a trustworthy way at scale. So I think there's something interesting there. And then the other piece is the cocktail business, which I started from an e-commerce side. Started obviously many years ago, and on reflection, I did an awful job at it. And I think knowing what I know now and the different perspectives on how do you actually build a successful business, I think it would be a whole different game. So I've always sort of wondered about sort of re-entering that market in some way, taking a second bite of the cherry.
Yeah. Well, there's a lot to be said for, something that didn't work and the lessons learned from that. I mean, I've had a business failure and I've had a business success. I had a web development business in Glasgow that I had to pull the plug on when the .com was booming and busting, and then I had a successful consulting business that we sold. So, but that would never have been successful had I not had the experiences of, the first business, and because the lessons that you get from that are, really serve you and stand you in good stead for, I think, being successful. So maybe that's something else for you to pursue in the future. Who knows? Listen, I really enjoyed it. Really. Well, there's the $1 million. There's the million dollar question. I have thought about that often. I mean, fashion is something I would probably gravitate towards. Not that it necessarily shows, but I do have a passion for fashion. But it's clearly a very competitive market, and if I were to ever do anything in it, I'd want to do it in a very sustainable way, and obviously paying sort of cognizance to the requirements to be a sustainable business, and be more responsible in relation to the planet, and the supply chain and product development and everything else would be very much at the core and the heart of what I do. I mean, the brand that I always look to when I talk about, exemplars within, brands that are both very customer centric, but do all the right things, in terms of diversity and inclusion and social responsibility and so on, is Patagonia. And when I'm talking to businesses and I say, and I don't think it matters whether you sell washers, to your point, or whether you sell fashion, or whether you sell outdoor products for the outdoors like Patagonia. I think every business should be thinking about how do you turn a customer into a fan. And that's a pretty good starting point. It's a bit like Jeff Bezos saying, I start with the customer and I work backwards. I often say start with customer lifetime value and work backwards. And so I'd be focused on making sure whatever happened, whatever it is I've sold, I did the best job of looking after the planet, looking after my community, looking after my colleagues, my team, and doing right by them, and obviously looking after my customers and creating an end-to-end proposition that delivered a truly customer-centric experience. So, long answer to a short question.
Very good.
Listen, it's been really brilliant. It's been great to have you on and to give, to reciprocate, as I said earlier. So thank you so much for sharing your insight. Love what you do, and we'll keep watching this space to see whether it's mocktails, cocktails, DIY, or retail transformation, or a combination of all of the above, as well as the events that you were alluding to. But it sounds like you've got an exciting few years ahead of you for sure. So thank you very much, Ollie, for joining today.
Thank you so much for having me. Great questions, a great conversation. Really appreciate it, Martin.
If you would like to know more about what we're doing at Customer Service Action, the platform where people can share their good and bad customer service stories and experiences in one impartial place, then please visit customerserviceaction.com. Please remember to subscribe on your favorite podcast app so you can be notified when we go live with future episodes. Thank you so much for joining us today on Customer Centricity with me, Martin Newman.